Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 5th of November. You're tuned into our mid-morning newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broome, and let's take a look at what's making the headlines. Early results are starting to drip in after Americans cast their ballots in midterm elections in a vote widely being viewed as a referendum on the presidency of Barack Obama. Saying it has no intention of speaking to its enemies, North Korea rules out holding talks with the US on human rights or nuclear issues. Washington says Pyongyang's current course is going nowhere. Plus, Korean exporters are feeling the heat as the Japanese yen falls to its lowest exchange rate against the Korean won in 6 years. We start with the latest on the midterm elections in the United States. For that, we'll go straight over to our Eunice Kim, who's been following developments for us at the news centre. So, Eunice, polling stations have closed on the East Coast and results are steadily streaming in. We see, what do we know so far?
Well, Mark, the first polls have closed in 9 eastern states, including Georgia, Ohio, Virginia, and the Carolinas. And even as the votes are being counted, one of the first projected and declared Republican wins was party leader and Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, giving him a pass to advance to become a Senate Majority Leader down the road. Republicans also picked up their first nab in West Virginia, a Senate seat that had been held by Democrats since 1956. Now, a lot of eyes are on the U.S. Senate race as Republicans only need 6 additional seats in America's upper house to claim a majority, as their control of the House of Representatives is all but certain. Even President Barack Obama admitted recently to a local radio show in Connecticut, as he urged people to go out and vote, that the Senate electoral map looks to heavily favor Republicans, the, quote, worst possible map seen since Dwight Eisenhower in 1958.
And Eunice, while we're on that note, these elections are being touted, as I mentioned during the headlines, as a referendum on President Barack Obama, whose approval ratings are pretty much in the doldrums these days. So what are the voters in the US so unhappy about?
Yeah, certainly he has not seen very high approval figures as of late, in the low 40% range, despite recent improvements in the U.S. economy. And ironically, a gridlocked Washington probably has a lot to do with that, as Congress has failed to pass a number of bills piling up due to deep partisan differences. Also, the improvement in economic indicators have not necessarily translated to an improvement in the average citizen's standard of living. Pundits also say the negative campaigns leading up to these polls that rung up to a tune of nearly $4 billion by the Republicans, which also featured global threats such as Ebola and the Islamic State militants entering U.S. borders, could very well affect voter sentiment, which could also mean discouraging people from going to the polls at all.
And Eunice, we understand it's quite possible we won't have the complete results. We're seeing some early results come in, but the full results might not be seen for days, possibly even weeks.
Yeah, and that's because the last polls in the 50 states will close in Alaska. That's projected to be around 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 3 p.m. here in Korea. But if no candidate wins a simple majority in the states of Louisiana and Georgia, there will be a runoff, which won't happen until December and January, respectively. So it could go as late as that.
Well, let's hope not. Let's hope we get some kind of result by then. Well, thank you very much for keeping an eye on the developments, Eunice, and we'll be speaking to you at noon Korea time again. Now, in the rest of the day's news, North Korea has ruled out holding any talks with the United States regarding either its human rights issues or things to do with its nuclear program. A spokesperson from the North's foreign ministry says Pyongyang will not discuss such topics with enemies that aim to topple the regime, adding it's only willing to speak with countries that respect its sovereign rights. Watchers say the official statement linking human rights and nuclear issues could be an attempt to influence Washington ahead of a possible UN General Assembly vote on a resolution against North Korea's human rights abuses. Now, US Secretary of State John Kerry says he hopes to work closely with China to make North Korea realise that its current path only leads to a dead end. In a speech at Johns Hopkins University on Tuesday, Kerry said North Korea will only realise security and prosperity when it gives up its nuclear program. The US diplomat also stressed the importance of cooperation with China on non-proliferation. Just last week, Kerry praised Beijing for putting pressure on the North by putting limitations on trade going in to the North. China, of course, is North Korea's last remaining major ally and a key provider of food and fuel supplies. Kerry is scheduled to visit China this week for a range of multi- and bilateral meetings before President Barack Obama visits Beijing for the APEC leaders meeting. And staying on matters related to North Korea, South Korea's unification minister has criticised North Korea for backing out of a second round of high-level talks that were planned recently, saying Pyongyang's attitude has broken the faith of inter-Korean agreements. Speaking with dozens of foreign ambassadors in Seoul on Tuesday, Ryu Gil-jae stressed the importance of sticking to commitments to break the vicious cycle of mutual mistrust. He also urged the North to take part in talks without any preconditions attached. The two Koreas agreed to meet for high-level talks in late October or early November, but the North cancelled them outright after it was angry over the flying of anti-Pyongyang leaflets by South Korean activists. Now, in economic news, the Japanese yen has plunged to a 6-year low against the Korean won, following the Bank of Japan's recent decision to flood the economy with cash by stepping up purchases of government bonds and Japanese stock funds. And this situation is taking an extremely heavy toll on Korean exporters. Our Park Ji-won reports.
The Bank of Japan's announcement of expanded monetary stimulus measures last Friday, worth trillions of yen, sent the stock prices of Korea's largest automakers, Hyundai and Kia Motors, slipping by more than 5% on Monday. Additional drops were recorded Tuesday, stripping Hyundai of its staunch second-place position in terms of market capitalization in Korea. Analysts say the fall is largely due to negative expectations that the Korean auto giant will not be able to keep up profitability and stay competitive against its Japanese counterparts.
Taking advantage of enhanced profits due to the weakening yen, Honda and Toyota have been focusing on technological improvements to their vehicles, like boosting fuel efficiency. Korea should keep in mind that the weakening yen will make them more competitive in terms of price and quality of products.
The effects of the weakening yen is not only hitting Korea's big conglomerates, but also sending strong shockwaves to smaller companies. 3 years ago, the yen was trading at more than 1,500 won per 100 yen, but now stands at around 950 won per 100 yen, meaning a 40% decrease in export revenues. According to the Korea Federation of SMEs, the break-even point for small and medium-sized exporter is 1,014 won per 100 yen. The current 1 yen exchange rate falls way below that.
If the exchange rate falls to around 951 per 100 yen, Korea's export volume will decrease 4.2% and down to 8.8% if the rate falls to 900.
Around half of Korea's top 100 exports fiercely compete with Japanese products, but as the yen weakened with no immediate end in sight, bleak forecasts are weighing heavy on Korea's main exporters. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, as Ji-won just mentioned there, the exchange rate is causing some serious headaches for the nation's exporters, but there's one industry that's enjoying quite the polar opposite experience. According to the tourism industry, Hanator, which is one of the nation's biggest travel agencies, saw the number of Korean tourists to Japan in October jump over 120% from the same month a year earlier. Interpark, another big agency here in Korea, saw its customers to Japan soar nearly 200% during the same period. Now, travel to Japan had been on a large downward spiral following the Fukushima nuclear disaster back in 2011, but analysts say recent demand has been driven by the weakening yen. The Japanese government also amended the country's duty-free system last month to try and lure even more tourists. Hanator officials say with the weak yen likely to continue for the time being, more Koreans will make the short hop to Japan, especially during the winter. Now, deregulation is a key part of the Park Geun-hye administration's plan to try and boost the ailing domestic economy. And as part of those efforts, the Korean government is easing restrictions within its 8 free economic zones that are dotted around the country in a bid to make them more attractive to investors. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
The Korean government is easing regulations on its 8 free economic zones to increase the number of developers and thereby make it less of a pain for businesses to invest there. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says it will lower the minimum requirement of developmental areas from the previous 330 to 200 square meters. The move will also give investors a higher rate of return, as the minimum reinvestment rate is being lowered from 25% to 10% of the profits generated from operating within the zones. Given the benefits, the move is expected to boost the number of private investors, as landowners and their associations will now be able to participate as developers of the zones. The ministry says it plans to raise $20 billion worth of economic benefit from the zones over the next 10 years.
The easing of restrictions is a move toward inducing more investment and development in the free economic zones, particularly in those that are still undeveloped.
There are currently 88 districts within the 8 free economic zones in Korea. A zone in Chungbuk and the East Coast Free Economic Zone were added to the list last year as part of efforts to revive the local economy. But despite a number of measures introduced over the years, more than 40% of the districts are currently undeveloped due to low participation. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The Korean government is warning that the country's low birth rate and ageing society will start putting the government's finances under a great amount of strain in the decades to come unless there are very significant tax hikes. According to a report by the National Assembly Budget Office, the national debt would amount to $13.5 trillion by the year 2060 if there are no additional tax rate increases. That's nearly 1.7 times larger than the country's expected GDP in the year 2060, meaning each citizen's share of this debt would be around $300,000. The report adds the government may not be able to repay its debt through state bonds, which it does at the moment, starting from the year 2033. Now, the number of registered vehicles in Korea has exceeded the 20 million mark for the first time ever, with the number of vehicles on the road doubling in the space of just 17 years. The nation's transport ministry says that as of the end of last month, Korea became the world's 15th and Asia's 4th nation to surpass the 20 million mark. China has the most registered vehicles in Asia, followed by India, Japan and then Korea. The Korean government has been collecting related data since 1945, and it took 52 years for Korea to exceed the 10 million mark. Ministry officials say the growth in number of registered vehicles reflects the size and importance of the country's automobile market.
Get connected to Korea and the world. Join us every weekday for the latest developments out of Korea, Asia, and beyond. On air, on your mobile, and online, we lead the way every day. Arirang News.
To try and resolve the crisis in Ukraine, the European Union also offers $15 billion. Now, over to a huge international event that's taking place in Korea's port city of Busan, but it's kind of wrapping up, coming to a close now. The International Telecommunication Union's meeting, which comes to a close in just 2 days' time, has adopted an agenda to promote the so-called Internet of Things. Our Song Ji-son reports.
The International Telecommunications Union, for the first time, adopted an agenda regarding the Internet of Things, which was proposed by this year's host, South Korea. IoT refers to the connection of devices and objects through the Internet, and Seoul had proposed that it be facilitated to prepare for the future. Less than 1% of these objects are currently connected to the Internet, but that number is expected to jump 10 times on the back of cloud computing and big data technologies, with the market size expanding by 5 times its current level to over $8 trillion by the year 2020. While the IoT stands to open new business opportunities for startups, supporting developing countries in their pursuit of the IoT remains a challenge for the ITU, as the resources in those nations are limited. According to the IoT index filed by the International Data Corporation last year, South Korea is the second most prepared country among G20 members after the United States, and with the latest adoption of its agenda, Seoul aims to expand its presence in setting global standards and supporting developing nations in IoT-related projects of ITU. Seoul's ICT Ministry has also designated IoT Week Korea 2014 for Wednesday to next Friday, where solutions and products related to IoT will be presented at multiple events at COEX and other locations around the capital and Busan. 송지선, ARIRANG News.
Now, a British think tank says Korea is the 25th best country to live in the world. Its index notes quite positively Korea's economy and its education system, but the report also says Korea would be well served to learn from countries like Norway and Switzerland and other countries in Europe in terms of other areas, particularly welfare. Gonsoa has this report.
South Korea is the 25th most prosperous country out of 142 countries around the world, according to a Prosperity Index report released by the British-based Legatum Institute. This year's ranking is a notch higher than last year. Korea's best ranking was 24th in 2011. Norway topped the list for the 6th consecutive year. It was followed by Switzerland and New Zealand. The 3 most prosperous Asian countries are Singapore, Japan, and Hong Kong. The report says South Korea is the 5th best Asian country to live in. African nations filled out the majority of the bottom spots, with the Central African Republic propping up the rest. While GDP is usually the most common way to assess a country's prosperity level, the Legatum report says its definition of prosperity is more than, quote, just the accumulation of material wealth. That's why the institute measures countries by 8 categories. Korea performs strongly in economy and education, ranking 9th and 15th respectively. But the personal freedom and social capital divisions are weak.
Korea remains stuck in the mid-20 level because of its overall welfare situation. In terms of day-to-day welfare, Korea is still an awfully long way behind countries like Norway and Switzerland. If we do not make changes there, Korea seen from the outside may be a country seen as a nice place to visit, but not one of the best to live in.
But analysts are optimistic that the government's latest efforts to improve its welfare policies could boost Korea's position on the Prosperity Index list in the coming years. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, despite SOA's report there saying that Korea is the 5th most prosperous nation in the whole of Asia, there are a section of society that aren't so happy at all, namely children. A nationwide survey of about 4,000 households with children under the age of 18 found that Korean children and teenagers were the least satisfied with their lives among OECD member states. Korea scored just over 60 points on a scale of 100. The Netherlands was top with a score of 94.2 points, so a 34-point difference there. Netherlands was followed by Iceland and Finland. Korea's welfare ministry says the dissatisfaction stems from extreme pressure to do very well at school, bullying, violence and internet addiction. Now, the usually tranquil country of Switzerland has been rocked by a pair of shootings that left 5 people dead. 3 bodies were found on Monday in the Alps town of Winderswil. That was characterized by local media as a crime of passion. Bern police said the shooter was one of the 2 men who died. The 3rd person killed near a train station was a woman. Hours later, in an apparently unrelated incident, another woman was shot dead in an apartment in the northern city of Basel. The regional public prosecutor's office said the suspect is believed to have moved on to shoot a man and a woman in a nearby flat before being arrested that night. Thai police say they have arrested the co-founder of Pirate Bay as he was attempting to cross into Thailand from Laos. Known to hackers as Tiamo, the 36-year-old was on the run while out on bail following a conviction in a Swedish court for aiding copyright infringement 5 years ago. Frederick Ney helped start the file-sharing website which helps users link to pirated content on the internet.
And a good Wednesday morning to you all as we kick things off in the PGA, where President Park Geun-hye accepted an invitation to become an honorary chairman of the President's Cup 2015 on Tuesday. With the President's Cup coming to Korea for the first time ever next year, international team vice captain Chae Kyung-ju and PGA Commissioner Tim Fincham, along with the captains of the international and U.S. team Nick Price and Jay Haas, were invited to the Cheongwadae. And with that, President Park Geun-hye accepted the invitation to become the honorary chairman of the President's Cup 2015, becoming just the second woman to accept the invitation since Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Meanwhile, the event will take place from October 8th to the 11th next year. And speaking of honorary roles, on Tuesday, figure queen Kim Yeon-ah was officially named the 6th Goodwill Ambassador for the upcoming 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, with the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics Organizing Committee announcing that the figure queen will become the latest honorary ambassador last week. She was introduced to the media officially on Tuesday. The 24-year-old, who retired from the sport after the 2014 Sochi Winter Games, said it's an honor to be able to contribute to the organizing of the Winter Games in Korea and that she'll do all she can to set up the best environment for competition. The 2010 Vancouver gold medalist also worked with the bidding committee 3 years ago and helped Pyeongchang win the rights to the Winter Olympics. All right, moving over to the 2014 Korean Series, which kicked off on Tuesday night with Game 1 of the best-of-7 series between the defending champions Samsung Lions and the Nexen Heroes. And going into the game here, top of the third inning, Vinny Rotino, that's an RBI double as Sung Won-chung scores from third, and it's 1-0 Nexen. Shortly after, Kang Jong-ho's sac fly to center field scores Vinny Rotino, and it's 2-0. However, the bottom of the inning, Yamyako Navarro with the man on, gone, a center field home run here. We're back to square one with the game tied 2-2. Stays at well until the top of the 8th inning. Kang Jong-ho driven to deep left, gone, a 2-run shot, and Nexen takes the lead again 4-2. And with that, Son Seung-la coming in for the save here in the 9th inning. Nexen takes game 1, 4-2. And now moving over to football this time, where Bayer Leverkusen faced off against Zenit St. Petersburg in Group C Champions League match earlier today, as sensational Son Heung-min scored once in the 68th minute and another 5 minutes later, helping his club win 2-1 and hold on to their first place lead in Group C. And with that, we're going to finish things off with more football here. Questions still remain on the 2022 Qatar World Cup and whether or not it's plausible to have the World Cup in the nation. And the latest news, there's a chance that the 2022 World Cup might take place in winter. Now, with FIFA recently holding a meeting in regards to the 2022 World Cup, FIFA's Secretary General Jerome Valquez stated that the event might be moved to either January to February or November to December. But with the Winter Olympics taking place usually at the beginning of February, the IOC might be against the idea, while UEFA seems to be against the idea of having it at the end of the year, with major Champions League matches scheduled at the time. Now, all options still remain open, with many even asking for a new host nation. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports news.
Good morning. Well, mostly sunny skies are featured at this hour, and heading towards the midday, the sun will be mixed with a lot of clouds. But overall, we can look forward to calm and nice afternoon, and highs will be reaching into upper teens in many areas. But dry weather continues as the dry weather advisory remains in effect here in the capital. So be extra cautious when handling fires. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Now, the daytime high in the capital and Daegu will top out at 19, while Gwangju and Busan will peak at 18 and 20, respectively. Now, on to other regions. Jeju Island will be getting up to 18 later on, and Daejeon and Dokdo will see highs of 17. Well, it seems like lots of clouds will be rolling in at the end of the week as the showers are forecasted for the southern provinces, but up here in Seoul will remain dry and highs will be remaining in the mid-teens. That's all for now. Back to you, Mark, in the studio.
Thank you very much, Jeon, for the weather, as always. And that's all we have for now. We'll be back again with another newscast at noon Korea time. Till then, goodbye.